Attention, the views expressed on this show are not necessarily those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, and or their affiliate and subordinated ministries and or nonprofits. Welcome to The Basics of Faith, Dr. Marty Hamilton. Marty, take it away.
Hey, I'm Marty. It's Basics of Faith. If you're a regular viewer of this program, you know that I usually have more questions than I do answers. So today is Black Friday. Okay, so we know that Black Friday is an attempt by the retailers to get their companies in the black. And so that's where that comes from. But according to Google, back in 1869, that day the gold prices dropped dramatically, and that led to a stock market crash, and wasn't a good thing. So, you know, what was bad then, you know, they've turned to good now. So anyway, if you are out there today, I suggest you not spend all your money, and but have a good time. So we're going to continue with our review of Genesis, and we were talking about Rebekah and Isaac and Laban. Laban was Rebekah's brother, and Isaac's servant gave a bunch of gifts to Rebekah, her mother, and to Laban. And so Rebekah married Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. Rebekah's father was Bethuel. He was a Syrian of Padam Aram, and Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to twins. The older son, his name was Esau because he was hairy, but he was also red whenever he was born. And Jacob was born next, and he held on to Esau's foot as he was delivered. That's pretty much how he got his name. I believe his name means supplanted. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate the food that he hunted. Esau was a hunter. That's what he did all the time. Just went out and that's what he did. But Isaac stayed around the house. He was a mild-mannered man. And Esau came in from hunting one day, and he was just starving to death. And so Jacob prepared him a meal of stew, and Esau traded his birthright to Jacob for that meal. Esau's name was, after that, called Edom, and this is where whenever you talk about the Edomites, those would be descendants of Esau. And Esau despised his birthright, and that was a bad deal. Seems like the culture and God put a lot of things on birthright. So Isaac was preparing to die, and he asked Esau to hunt and prepare him some game so Isaac could give Esau his blessing. So Rebekah and Jacob overheard this, and they deceived Isaac by posing Jacob as Esau. And they went to great lengths to get this done. And also he was after Isaac's blessing, Jacob was. So when Esau found out what had happened, he cried out for Isaac to bless him also. Isaac denied this request, and Esau complained Jacob stole his birthright and his blessing, which actually Esau traded it off, is what he did. But he did steal his blessing from Isaac, and declared Jacob's name was rightly named because he was supplanted twice. Isaac announced that Esau would serve Jacob. It's usually the opposite way around, but because of the birthright deal, Isaac pronounced that before he died. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran, and in a dream angels of God ascended and descended a ladder. God told Isaac that in him and his seed all the families of earth will be blessed. And we know that, and that's important. Jacob poured oil on the stone that was at the head of a bed that he was laying at that night, and he renamed the place Bethel, which means the house of God, from that city that was previously called Luz, L-U-Z. I believe I said that right. Jacob swore to give God the 10th as his tithe. So he kind of did the same thing that Abraham did. Jacob worked for Laban for 7 years to marry Laban's younger daughter. Her name was Rachel. But Jacob contracted another 7 years whenever Laban deceived him, and he gave him Leah as Jacob's wife instead of Rachel. So he had to work contracted to work another 7 years for Rachel because of a deception. And Leah's was the older daughter, and that's the excuse he used, that in his culture the older daughter had to be married before the younger daughter. And Zilpah was Leah's maid, and she went along with the marriage. Laban fulfilled his promise this time and gave Rachel as Jacob's wife, along with her maid Bilhah. Leah gave Jacob 4 sons. The first 4 were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. God changed Jacob's name to Israel after Jacob wrestled with God. And at the place they wrestled was Peniel, P-E-N-I-E-L. And this means I have seen God face to face. While wrestling with God, Jacob's hip was put out of place and caused him to limp. And it says in Bible, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the muscle from the hip socket because of this. And Jacob was afraid to meet up with Esau again, because after he deceived him, Rebekah, his mother, told him to, Rachel, no, I was right. Rebekah's mother told him to take off and hide from his brother, because his brother was really mad and he was capable of hurting him. But anyway, they met up, and Esau and Jacob embraced and kissed each other, and Esau received a whole lot of gifts from Jacob. Israel loved Joseph more than the other children and made him a coat of many colors. I'm sure as a kid you've heard this story. And Joseph relayed his dreams of ruling over his brothers, and they hated him for it. They really resented that his brother would tell them this stuff, and it really made him mad. So Reuben convinced his brothers not to kill Joseph because they were out to kill him. And Reuben said, let's not kill him. And Judah took up the rest of it and sold his brother to the Ishmaelites, which in some places is also called Midianites. And they took Joseph down to Egypt. They sold him for 20 shekels of silver. The brothers took the coat of many colors and dipped it in goat's blood, and this made Israel believe that his son Joseph was killed. And so whenever they got him down to Egypt, they sold Joseph to Potiphar. Potiphar was an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard in Egypt. So Joseph's master in Egypt saw that God was with Joseph. Joseph had favor wherever he went, and all that he did prospered him. Joseph's master's wife accused Joseph of being inappropriate with her falsely, and so the husband, which was Joseph's master, put Joseph in the king's prison. Joseph received favor from God continually in the sight of the prison keeper, and so Joseph was put in charge of all the prisoners. This led to the king of Egypt's, the butler and the baker were both put in prison with Joseph for some reason. And they had dreams. The butler and baker had dreams, and the butler's dream was that 3 vines with grapes was pressed into Pharaoh's cup. So Joseph was asked to interpret this dream of a butler, and he said that within 3 days, Pharaoh's confidence in the butler would be restored. And Joseph asked the butler to ask Pharaoh to pardon him when he got out of prison. This all happened. But the butler, whenever he got out of prison, didn't do it. And he got out of prison just like Joseph said he would, but he didn't relay the message to Pharaoh. So next came the baker's dream. And he said he had 3 baskets on his head, and one was filled with baked goods for Pharaoh. Birds came along and ate the baked goods out of the basket on his head. Joseph's interpretation was that within 3 days, Pharaoh will have his head removed and hang him on a tree, and the birds will eat his flesh. These things all happened as Joseph predicted, but the butler forgot to say anything to Pharaoh about Joseph's request. So 2 years go by, and Pharaoh has a dream. And he asked a lot of his people to interpret the dream for him, and he couldn't get an interpretation. So at that time, let me tell you about the dream first. In his dream, there were 7 fat cows appeared, and 7 gaunt-looking cows appeared, and they ate the fat cows. The second dream was 7 heads of grain that were really ripe and plump and good were devoured by 7 thin heads. They didn't look so good, and they ate the plump ones. The butler remembered Joseph, interpreted dreams, and told Pharaoh to summon Joseph. You know, it came back to him, hey, this guy can interpret your dreams, and he was trying to get favor with Pharaoh. So during this, Joseph gave all the credit to God for the interpretation and told Pharaoh that Egypt would have 7 years of plenty, and then it would be followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph advised to store 1/5 of produce, which would be 20% of the plentiful years, for the famine years. So they built these warehouses. They called them storehouses, but they'd be great big warehouses to plant to put the rest of the food in there. This all happened when Joseph was 30 years old, and Pharaoh made him second command over all of Egypt, because if he could tell Pharaoh what to do, then he was up to the job of taking care of Egypt. So during this time, Joseph married and had 2 sons. The older son was Manasseh, and the younger son was Ephraim. So all the countries all over the world went to Joseph, and he opened the storehouses to sell everyone during the severe famine. He had all this extra food, and he sold it to everybody. Jacob and his sons, ones he had left, were up in Canaan, and they ran out of food. So Jacob sent out 10 of his sons. He left Benjamin at home to stay with him. Benjamin was the youngest. And so he sent the boys down to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because of a severe famine there in Canaan. So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they didn't recognize him. They had no idea. So he remembered in his dream when he was young. So Joseph accused them of being spies and put one of them in prison. I believe it was Simeon. He sent the rest of them with grain and their money back to retrieve Benjamin and bring him back to Egypt. He stuck their money back in their knapsacks or whatever they had. So the brothers took gifts and double portion of the money, along with Benjamin, back to Joseph. They talked Jacob into releasing Benjamin, and he did not want to do it. And I wanted to read something in Genesis 43. which I thought was different. Okay, I'm going to start in 43:30, Genesis. Now his heart yearned for his brother, so Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. And he went into his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and he restrained himself and said, "Serve of bread." So they set him in a place by himself, and them by themselves. We're talking about the brothers and the Egyptians. And the Egyptians who ate with them, with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. I thought that was interesting. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And men looked in astonishment at one another. Then he took servants to them from behind him, but Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him. I thought it was odd that whatever he did seat them, Joseph made table arrangements of where they were going to seat, and it went from the oldest to the youngest. I don't know. I thought that was interesting. Okay, where am I at? So, according to Genesis 43:32, it says that it is an abomination for an Egyptian to eat with a Hebrew, and Benjamin's portion of food was 5 times greater than anyone else, like I read. Joseph had his silver cup put into Benjamin's sack, and everyone had a lot of money put in their sacks. They left, but were stopped, and the items were found. Judah explained to Joseph, if he did not take Benjamin back to Jacob, that his father would surely die from sadness. Joseph admitted that he was there with his brother and explained to him that God sent him there in his position to preserve the family lives. He gave the land of, we're talking about, Pharaoh gave the land of Goshen in Egypt for Israel to dwell in, and Joseph kissed and wept over all of his brothers. Israel had a hard time believing reports of his children, but was really amazed and glad that Joseph was still alive. At the end of Jacob's life, well, I got like 4 minutes. Jacob prophesied to his children before he died, and Reuben, the firstborn, was told that he would not excel because he defiled Jacob's bed. Simeon and Levi were told that Jacob would not be honored by their assembly because their anger would be cursed. And this is interesting. This is important. Remember we talked about the scepter, and we said that the scepter meant that it was a staff held by a ruler as a symbol of sovereignty. And in the Bible it says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah. Okay? You might remember that. Judah is a lion's whelp and shall be praised. That's what Judah means, is praise. Zebulun's border will adjoin Sidon, Sidon, and he will dwell as a port by the sea. Okay, so it was a port there in Israel. And Issachar becomes a band of slaves, and Dan will judge his people. That's what Dan means, is judge. And Gad will be in fights pretty much his whole time, but at the last he will triumph. And Asher will yield royal dainties. I don't really know what that means, but sounds interesting. Naphtali uses beautiful words. And Joseph will receive blessings and crown the head of him who was separate from his brothers. And Benjamin, the youngest, is a ravenous wolf. After giving his blessing to each of his children and instructions that he wanted to be buried in the cave of Machpelah, and then Joseph died. I will probably next time talk about the caves of Machpelah. All the patriarchs and their wives were buried there in this cave. It's kind of interesting what happened to it nowadays. Anyway, I will say that, okay, all of his sons were parts of a tribe, except Joseph didn't make it back. So his sons, which would be Israel, or Jacob's grandsons, actually became two of the tribes. So it would be Manasseh and Ephraim. And then the Levites weren't given a portion of land. They were put in charge of a temple. Okay? So that's where the 12 tribes come from. I don't think a lot of... pardon me?
There was actually 13 tribes.
13 tribes, exactly. And that's good to point out.
But the Levites didn't get the land, so they don't count those.
Exactly. But a lot of people think it was just the sons, but there's 2 grandsons involved in the tribes. So anyway, I hope you had a really nice Thanksgiving, and traffic could be a little rough out there today, so I pray that you get around fine and don't spend all your money. Till next time.